So very good evening, everyone. So let us begin our day for this chapter, which is less chapter number 3, and the topic which we'll be covering is macro definitions. So in this, there are two topics: defining and calling a macro, and of course, macro parameters. So what is macro? What are macro parameters? We'll see it all in detail in this particular topic. So let's move with your first topic, defining and calling macro. So the objective here is we'll define the purpose of a macro definition. We'll specify the steps for creating and storing a macro, identify the steps for calling a macro, investigate the program flow of a macro call. So first and foremost, let's understand what macro definition, macro call is all about. Okay, so I'll just show you the same in a program. So I'll just open my studio. I hope you people have kept your PDF book handy and also connected to your SAS Studio. Alright, so let me connect with my data files. Okay, so normally if you know that if we are writing any program, suppose you are doing a program or creating a program where you are simply writing a data to be created. So I'm creating a data from SAS help dot class run. Okay, and I actually do the reporting part. So I write proc print data is equal to class and I simply run. So what I'm doing, I'm writing two steps. First step is a table is created or a data set is created. And the second step is I'm creating a report on this data set. So in case this process is to be done, which is been required to be done frequently on a specific table for your data, or you want to also use the frequency, or instead of frequency you want the mean weight of the student. So I write proc means data equal to, it's your data set class var weight, and you have to class it by age. Okay, so if this is the program, you know proc means is nothing but it will give you the summary report for the mean of your weight in the group of ages, correct? And you want only the mean weight, you don't want all others. So what you write, you want only mean, and you want max decimal should be 0, or keep the weight, yeah, leave the weight as whole figure. Fine, so these are the mean weights between the age groups, and this is the number of people within this combination of age and weight, age and weight. All right, so this is a normal table, fine, or a normal report, but this is to be done at a regular basis. So you are saving this code, all right, and you are every time opening this window of your code where you have saved it, and you are running it manually. So it's going to be a very time consuming process, and it's not that feasible whenever you're working in a live scenario. You need to open a code and then you need to execute. It is going to be tedious, time consuming, because you people might be busy with various projects, but this is a routine thing which you need to work maybe. So in that case, what you are going to do is, I'm going to write a macro. I write a pair of statements called percent macro. I give the name, suppose it's the name, I give it class RPT. All right. And I end this with my pair of statement, another part of it called amend. Amend with the name. Now understand. All right. And I execute this. So when I run this at the backend in the program, it will simply give me this. Okay. But it's not giving me the output for underlying program. So what I do is just look at what I'm just doing it. So I'm writing percent class underscore RPT. No semicolon. I'm executing this. Fine. So when I execute this, see in my log, when I had just called this, it's telling 19 observations were created from this data set. It read to create this table. Then it's telling it has used proc print. Then it's telling it has used proc means. And if you see the result, you get proc print result, you create proc means result, and you also see a data set is created. So what have you done? So what we are doing is we are automating this whole code where you have a data step and two proc steps, where you are saving this whole code with the name as class report. And this is the instructions which you are automating this code, that every time typing the code or saving this code window, opening it and executing it, you just call it, and this helps you minimize your coding time, and this is called as automating your program. So this, what you are creating within this pair of macro and percent amend, you are writing either SAS statements, SAS steps, or a macro statements, which you are saving it as macro definition. So either we call this as a macro definition, or we simply call it as a macro, and here we call that macro definition, or this is also termed as macro program, macro definition, or a macro, and you're just simply calling it. So when you're calling, you're not giving any semicolon. Why? Because it's not a statement. You're simply asking SAS to call this. So when you call this, so underlying program within this is actually this. Then this program gets executed. Are you understanding what I did? And this is termed as a macro program. And this we call the name which we have given, which is saving underline code, is termed as a macro definition or a macro, or you also call it as a macro program. And you simply call it. All right. So this is where you are making your task more simple by writing a macro definition. Is this understood by everyone?
Yes, Ashwini.
Okay. So the same thing it's telling. We'll be identifying the steps for calling a macro, investigate the flow, we specifies the steps creating and storing a macro, and will define the purpose of macro definition. So let's understand what is a macro definition. So like macro variables, macro generate text. However, macros, so it's telling macros, that means it's a program. What program? It's the same program which we are using it. Okay, one sec. Is anyone in the waiting list? No. All right. So this is termed as a macros. Okay, so it's called as a macro. So when you write multiple macro, you call it as macros. So however, macros can contain programming logic to dynamically control what text is generated and when it is generated. Macros can also accept parameters. Now what parameters are? It's termed as macro variables. So how they are created, how they are used, we'll see in upcoming topic. But at this point, just understand what a macro program is. So you call it as a macro or you term it as a macro definition, can store either a macro language statement or expression, complete or partial SAS statements, complete or partial SAS steps, any text, any combination of the above. So in our case, we have created underlined code which consists as SAS steps, correct? Okay. So see, it's telling you write the steps, you save it as a macro, hence it's telling a percent sign, that means it's a whole macro program. Same like this. Within the pair of this percent macro and percent emit. So what does percent macro does? It is an indication to SAS that you are asking it to create a macro program or a macro definition, or you also term it as macro with the name of class RPT, which will be saving the underlying code, and this indicates percent element that end your step to create a macro definition. So macro end and you give the name. All right. Okay. So defining a macro. So here the example is this code defines the time macro which displays current time. So see, now this macro is written with macro statement called as percent put. So in the previous slide, what it was telling, what does the macro definition store? Either SAS language statement or experience. So in our this example, it is creating, or it has been saved with macro statement. Why it's a macro statement? Because it's starting with person and it's followed with a name token, hence it's person put. It's a statement which ends with a semicolon, and you know person put is a macro statement, hence this is saving macro statement. So what is the statement? The current time is sys function, you are extracting system time and applying a format. So see the syntax, percent macro, give the macro name, you write the macro text and you end it with percent amend, the name of your macro. So it's given here at the end, it's an optional parenthesis. Why? Because when you end, either you give the name of your macro as time, or even if you do not write, it is understood that it is going to create a macro named as time. So like here, even if I don't write this, it's going to be the same thing. So no error. So when I execute this program, it just shows me in the log that this was the program. Correct? But do you get any special message that whether this program is executed without any errors? No, correct? So you're not getting any message. See, there is no note. Getting it? I hope you're understanding what I'm trying to tell you.
Yes.
Others,
Yes.
Yes, teacher.
Priyanka.
Yes.
So in case if you want to see that whether this program is executing without any errors or warnings or no or notes, at least it should give that it is successfully executed. We write a global statement called options, and you want to see the compile time statement of error message or warning message. So you introduce a state option called as m compile note equal to. Okay, and you write all is the keyword. Fine. So now execute this along with this options and check your log. See, now it's telling a note. It's telling the macro with the name class RPT is completed its compilation without errors. So what it contains? It contains 5 instructions and 192 byte space is using to store. Now when we are seeing this note, it is telling that it's saving this macro. So this macro is saved as a catalog file, same like your formats. I hope you remember user defined formats we had seen.
Yeah, formats and informats.
Correct. So formats are saved as catalog files. I hope you remember the last part of PG2 which we have learned.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Correct. Same thing. Macros are saved as formats, and here it is saved with a format name. Sorry, not format, catalog. Sorry. And it is saved as class RPT. All right. So it is by default currently saving in your work library. So if you see your macros path, where is your physical data is all saved. So let's check for a catalog file for this macro. See, SAS macro dot SAS7b dat. So it's saved with the default catalog name as SAS macro, and within this, it will be saving it class apart. All right. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Fine. Okay. So let's see this on the slides also. So what is it telling? So this was the syntax. So it's telling macro names follow your SAS naming conventions and cannot be reversed or it cannot be the names such as names of your macro statement or functions like percent or scan, for example. So it's telling it should save with a unique name. It should not save with the name with already existing macro keywords. Okay, fine. So creating and storing a macro. So first step, you have created a macro. See, so it's telling you created a macro. Now you want to execute it. So how do you submit this macro definition? You simply write percent and a macro name with a time. It's called as calling a macro. So this is what it's telling. First and foremost, what it will do, first step, you are creating a macro. So when you submit a macro program, the macro is compiled. So because it's a macro language, understand how it works. A macro language statements or expression, if any, are checked for syntax error and compiled. So what it's telling, that when you submit, so someone who has kept yourself on mute, so I'll mute it, no problem. Okay, so what it's trying to tell here, that when we are actually executing or storing your macro, it gets compiled and it gives you the message about whether any errors or warnings. So it in first go, it will never execute your macro. So it will compile your macro. So what it compiles within the compilation phase, it compiles your macro language statement or expressions. If the program consists any, then it will checked for any syntax error and it will compile only the macro statements. Whereas the underlying code, if it has any SAS statements or other text, those are not checked for syntax and it is not compiled. That means when we had executed this macro program, okay, we get the message only about macro statements been compiled and they are compiled without errors. So what are the macro statements? The macro statements are percent macro class RPT and percent mn. So the underlying SAS statement is not compiled. It's not checked for syntax errors. All right. Just understand at this point why it's happening like this. So how it works, why it's doing that, we'll see in upcoming slide. But at this point, at first stage, just understand that when you are executing this code to be stored in the memory, it will check for only macro statements for any error messages. Okay, or it will check the statements of macro language or expressions for syntax check and then it will compile, not for SAS. And what it will happen in second step or how it works, then it gets stored as a macro. So it gets stored as a catalog file. So compiled macro is stored by default in the temporary catalog name work.sas macro with an entry type as macro. All right, everyone understood now? Okay, so in case if you want to see at the backend how a macro is been compiled without any errors, you need to open up a dialog with SAS with a global option statement telling options m compile not equal to all. So when you write this option statements, this code when you have asked to store it, it will just check for the macro statements for any compilation error message and it gives the message what it is storing or what space it is taking to store. So default it is m compiled not equal to none. So if you want to overcome this default option, you write options m compile not equal to all. That's why you get this compilation note message in log that it is successfully compiled. All right. So to call a macro, precede the macro name with percent sign. So the name of your macro and a percent sign without a semicolon, it indicates you are calling your macro program. And what does this percent time contains at the back at the back end? It contains the person put statement. Hence, person put shows the information in log. So it's telling the current time is this in time format, which is am dot pm dot. Correct. So this is what it is showing. It's pm. Correct. So this was the time am pm dot, which was the format applied. That's why you see this as a applied format on your time for your system in log. So a macro call can appear anywhere similar to macro variable reference. Represents a macro trigger. Yes, it's a macro trigger because it's followed. It starts with a percent followed with a name token. It's processed or passed in macro processor. Why? Because it's a macro keyword. Correct? Is not a statement, so no semicolon required. Causes macro to execution. That means at backend, what is its underlying program? That program it will execute. All right. Okay. So does the macro call below require semicolon?
No.
No.
No. So when you're calling a macro, no need of semicolon. So semicolon is not required and it may cause some problems in some areas when you execute with a semicolon. So sometimes it will execute it without error, but sometimes it will not give you any error. So it's better to follow the instructions that when you're calling a macro, do not call it with a semicolon. Fine. So same as if you remember with proc format, we were looking the catalog instructions. So in our case also, if you want to see the contents of your catalog file of your work library for any macros, just write proc catalog. Now because it wasn't end with a semicolon, I gave this semicolon after this and write proc catalog cat equal to. Okay, so I write work dot as this program SAS macro. Okay, I write I want to see its contents, and when I check this, it will give you the report that your work library consists of macro. One sec, let me check the word. Where you see your SAS macro contents quit. Okay, let's end with quit. So it's telling no macro entries. Did we write correctly? Okay, it's not giving us any information. All fine. Let it be. Let's see later on. But this is what it will give us the message. Okay, fine. All right. So this is how you get the report of a macro, which is saved as a catalog file. So it's telling time is a macro created and modified. Okay. So because you had given this title, so this title appears in your output window for proc catalog. So catalog cat equal to, okay, fine. Now, how can you store this permanently? So if you want to store your macros permanently, first step is set appropriate system option. So write your option statement mstored SAS mstore equal to give your library reference. Okay, so what is mstored? It enables storage of compiled macro in a permanent library. SAS mstored designates a permanent library to store compiled macros. And then you specify while you are creating a macro definition in your macro definition statement, give this two options telling store source. So what this source does, it will use this source of your library, which is your system option, to store it permanently. So in our case also, in our program, in my system option, I can write SAS, or you write mstore. Okay, it's called mstored, and I write what I'm going to mstore, my macro language. So it is SAS mstore. So SAS mstore equal to the source I'm giving is Orion. All right, mstore equal to, see, SAS mstore. All right, SAS mstore. And while
And
creating, yeah,
the spelling
option,
of SAS store is wrong. That's why it's
yeah, now it's corrected. So option here, I'll write store. So this is what it's telling, store and source. So I'm writing store source. Fine. Now let's understand. So I'll execute this to store it permanently in my Orion library. So let's check in log first. So this is what the message. So now what it's telling, it's stored without any errors. Okay, so let's check your Orion library. Now in Studio, instead of library, we'll see the path for Orion, which is in your macro path. Okay, so in your macro path, we'll check for this. Here it is. Okay, so see, it's a catalog file. Fine. So going back now, instead of work, I write Orion. Now let's check the contents for this library. Done. So currently it consists this all macros. So this was our recently created macro. Understood, everyone? So I had saved earlier time permanently, so it's giving it lower. Okay. See, this is our current one. I hope you are understanding. So this is the contents for a catalog which is in your permanent library Orion within your SAS macro catalog files. All fine, everyone?
Yes.
Yes, Shani.
yes.
Good. So this was all about. So see, same thing. So you can store it permanently. So along with your, when you start with a new session, now no need of every time writing this program. So same in our case, no need of writing this whole program. When you start a new session, simply connect your session with your library with libname statement, and you write this options, mstored, msas store, the source should be Orion. Now while creating your macro, you have already given this source, hence simply call it like this. So that's why in new SAS session, it's telling you simply connect with your library, write this option and simply call your macro. So no need of every time writing your program or opening the code where you have saved the program file and executing it manually. So this part is called as automation. Okay, and this is your macro definition. All fine?
Yes.
Okay. So now let's understand the same with a business scenario. But in case if you want to work ahead with it, so you can open this demonstration D01, D02 and D03, which is for your M1, that is your macro. So in your macros, come to your program files for lesson 3, demo D01 and D03 is there. There is no D02 for you, it's suppose. So if it's not there, you can simply see what 2 is. It's about your catalog file. So I'll give this as a demo 2 in your chat box. Go ahead, work with this demonstrations. Okay, so let's check what Sarupa is facing error. Sarupa, please share your screen.
Just a minute. It says was disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, one sec. Yeah, now try it.
Can you see it?
Yes. So what's the error?
Just a minute, I will run it. Already run it. It says unable to clear or reassign the library Orion because it is still in use.
It's because instead of writing this, just comment that library because you've already created a library, correct? But you have not created a macro called ampersand path. That's why you're getting that error.
Okay, just a minute.
But your macro got compiled.
Okay, this here. Okay.
This is already there and you're writing ampersand path. So what is ampersand path? SAS is not understanding it. Are you getting it? No, let this be as it is.
Okay.
Come to your program. Uncomment this part. Okay, one sec. Show me your libname statement. Libname code.
Yeah, this is the libname code.
Okay, one sec. Give me the control of your screen.
Yeah.
Make this as a full screen. So can you make this as a full screen?
Yeah, I made
Studio?
it as a full screen.
Okay, great. So see this which you had created as this macro path now. So you are asking this, it's limited to only this, whether it's specifying this MC1.
No.
So it's better either you include this MC1 also as a part of it.
Okay.
So coming back to your demo. Now your library you have created like this. So let's execute and check it out. So it's still telling because it's there already here. So what you can do is
Okay.
try to reconnect it. Either you do this way or you have already created a library. So it's okay. It's not a getting reassigned. So don't worry. But you have already created here, right?
Yeah.
Earlier
Yeah.
with this lib name, right?
Yeah.
So it's there. So it's better no need of again recreating it.
Okay.
So there we had.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's recreate it again. Still in use. It's okay, but this is how it's doing. So when you're calling, it's getting compiled. So did you not use mcompile note? Okay, so it's getting created. See, your time is also it's showing in log because it's a person put statement. It's showing the time, current time, whatever you have it currently on your system, right? And
Yeah.
when you check your library, suppose now your library is actually the path for Orion. So if you go and check your Orion path for your physical table for macros, so you will see in this path, you'll find you have a catalog file. Just refresh this. So do you see anywhere in this path?
It will be in S.
Yeah, one sec, let me check whether it's updated at the bottom after the code. After all the programs. Others, I hope you've followed and understood what we have done recently.
Yes, actually. I got the
Yes.
content also. Contents of
Okay.
the uh,
Okay.
time that is there.
Good. What happened? Where it is? So you can see it later on. Swarupa, if you can just scroll and check time macro, or you just see SAS macro. If it's not finding here, do one thing. Come to your code. One sec. Just be slow. Okay. One sec. Don't move your cursor. Let's go into the code again. And let us do it programmatically where we can see it with your catalog file. So you can write proc catalog cat equal to Orion dot SAS macro. You need to see its contents. Run, or you write it as quit. But here it's not highlighting anything in blue. So what you do is before your proc contents or proc catalog, just give one semicolon so that it's stating this right understood. Therefore, if you give a semicolon, this all will be fine. See, it's telling Orion library consists a catalog name called file. Name is time, and it's a macro type of file, and when it was created. Fine, it's there in your Orion library. Okay, so we saw it programmatically. Okay, all fine? Yes, Swarupa and others.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay.
Done.
Swarupa, what happened? Are you there on the screen? Priyanka, I hope you've understood the concept.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I understood.
Need to see the.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
please, I'll stop sharing. So please stop sharing
Yeah,
Swarupa from your end.
yeah.
Yeah,
Fine.
thank you. Okay, so we did this. Now let's understand a business scenario. Now, in our earlier demo, it was simple. Your person put statement. That means it is showing you the information in log. It's your macro statement. Now we'll see the example of SAS statements. So this is the business scenario. It's telling to minimize typing, create a macro named cal c. So this consists a macro or a simple SAS program called proc print. A proc means data equal to orion.orderFact run. So calc macro generates complete SAS statements and complete SAS steps. Yes, it is having complete SAS statement and SAS steps. Okay, and it contains no macro language. Yes, within this proc means there is no macro language. There is no percent with a name token. There is no macro variable as well. So it is simple a SAS program. So this can also be saved as a macro. That is what they are trying to tell you. So understand the program flow now. So when you call this calc, you know it is actually saved as a catalog file. Okay, so it's saved as a macro catalog file. So when this you are calling, or when you are creating this, how it works in macro processor. So when macro processor receives a macro call, it takes the following action. It looks for this macro in that particular library. So that macro is unveiled. That is what is there within it. So it compiles the underlined macros language statements, if any, then it is copied to input stack, sends a SAS code and other text to the input stack for word scanning. So this is how the processing occurs. So we'll see it in detail. Okay. So if it gets paused while your word scanner tokenizes inserted text and SAS code, if any, compiles and execute, resumes execution of your macro language statement, if any. So let's see how it works. Okay. Wanted to show you that process. Yeah. Now look at here. When you are calling %cal_c, okay. So now what is %cal_c? It's as a macro definition, correct? So when you're calling it, it's actually copied to input stack. From input stack, it goes to word scanner. So when it goes to word scanner during tokenizing, it finds it's a macro trigger. It's with percent followed with the name token. So it's copied to macro processor. So when it's copied to macro processor, it looks into, because by default, the step is it will first look into your work library. So it looks into your work library. It finds there is this macro, okay, with this name. So what does this consist? It consists underline code. So what is that underline code? So whatever is that underline code, it copies it to your input stack. And from input stack, it again goes to normal processing, word scanning, compiling and compilation. So this is how the macro processor works. All right. So moving back to this program. So when you are calling this macro, okay, so that's what it's telling. It searches the macro in a of your catalog file in the particular source library. By default, it will first search in macro, the macro in your work library, and then it will go to source. Fine. Same like formats, catalog file. Even if you save those formats permanently, its default behavior, it will first search into work. Correct? Same thing is here. Then it executes compiled macro language statements, if any. Fine. Then it goes to input stack, because this comes into macro processor. So if it has any SAS program, it comes to input stack, and input stack follows the normal return from compilation to execution. Then it pauses while the word scanner tokenizes inserted text and SAS code, if any, compiles and executes, and resumes execution of macro language statement, if any. So this is how the program flow is. And this is where, because of M compile note, you get this message that how this macro is compiled and what is the space it requires to store. Okay, and it's telling it is compiled without any errors. So please mute. Someone has keep yourself unmuted. So please mute yourself. So it's telling procmin source code does not appear in logs. See, when you call this %calc, so in our program also, so when I'm into this and I call, suppose %time. Now %time is all fine. It's actually a person put statement itself. So person put statement shows the information in log. But when we were in this program, when we called this person class RPT, it simply showed that it is executing your underline code, and you get the information about output in respective windows. But when you check your log, when you had called this percent RPT, do you see any underline code about our class RPT? No. So in case if you want to check that what is the underlying program while calling your RPT, you write options It's a system options. Options, you write mprint. Mprint, macro print, that means the macro program which you are executing while processing the underlying code of your macro program, it reveals into log. Okay. And that underlying program is then processed through input stack, word scanner, and compiler. Okay. So that's what this slide was telling earlier. This, this. So if you have any macro language within it, your macro program consists any SAS language statement, it is copied to input stack, then it goes to word scanner, and from word scanner, it will execute your underlying macro program. Okay, that's what it was trying to tell with this flow chart. So it's taking time here. So people, you can also try before calling person put, or your when you were calling your time, just try to make use of options mprint so that you get the underlying program in log. So see, it's completed the process. Let's check your log now. So now look at your log. See, I called person class RPT. So when I called it, it's telling because of mprint, when you called this macro program, its underlying code first step is data step. Correct? Agreed? So this is what it was. Underline first step was data step. Right? Are you all there with me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So the underlying code, because of mprint, I see this message in log. So this is what it finished executing. So it's telling it read 19 rows from input data and it created a new table. Post this code, I had, because of mprint, it's showing me the underlying code. I had another code in my program, procprint. So it's telling 19 observations were there read from this work.class and procprint use. After that, it's telling you had procmins. And this is what is the note for procmins. That's it. So this is what is happening at the back end with mprint. All right. So with mprint, it shows you print. It just tells you or it gives the information what this macro actually consists or underlying code. M is macro print. That means show the underlying code in your macro programs in log. That's it. So this is what mprint works. Okay. So you get the source code at the backend, which is executing. See this because of mprint person calc consist procmins. So you can try this demo D04A to create a macro called calc, and then you can try it out with mprint using option while calling. Okay, try this. Demo 04A.
Yes, Ashwini is coming.
Coming?
Yeah.
Good. Shanmuga, Swarupa, Priyanka.
It's running for me, Ashwini. Wait.
Okay.
Ashwini, it ran for me. I got the results.
Good. Swarupa,
It's
Then
giving me
Ashwini.
error.
what error you are getting, Swarupa?
It says file oran dot order underscore fact data does not exist.
Do one thing. Go back to your libname statement of
Hmm.
your libraries where you have created written
Yeah.
libname.
Uh-huh.
Re-execute that and then re-execute the code.
Okay.
Ashwini,
Yes.
in one of the slides where it is defining and calling a macro,
Hmm.
at the bottom of the slide, it has shown like proc means source code doesn't appear in SAS log. Before
Doesn't
this,
appear in
SAS log.
earlier without imprint it was not showing. Nah, that's what it was telling.
Oh,
Before writing imprint it was not showing.
yes, yes. Okay, okay, understood.
Correct. So see here, when you
Yes.
called it, it's
Hmm.
not having imprint.
Yeah.
But then if you want to check, you use this option imprint, you get this information. That's what it's telling. Default setting is no imprint.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Done.
Ashwini, it is
Finished.
giving the same error again for the
Okay.
oran.
Show me your screen. Show me your screen.
Okay.
Show me the log. Make this as a full screen for me.
Just a minute. Allowing me to make it big screen. Yeah. Okay. This is the
Come to your libname statement.
yeah.
Okay. So this is MC1. Fine. Execute this log libname, only libname statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unable to clear. Okay. What you do is just close this window and restart your new session. Don't worry.
Okay. Like totally sign out and then
Yeah,
come.
yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So I'll stop sharing then, right?
Okay.
Ashwini,
Yes.
for me, it ran like with imprint with all the information, but then I ran it without imprint.
Hmm.
And the results in the log and the result window are still same.
Yeah,
There's
it's because it's option statements is a global statement, right? So that imprint is active throughout your session. So you call n number of macros. Every macro which you will call in the backend, it will give you the imprint message because it's a
uh,
global statement.
okay, got it. Yes.
All right, so with proc options imprint, we know now it gives you the underlying program of your macro when you are calling it. What does the underlying program is and how it works. Okay, now let's see the business scenario. Now we have learned that your macros can be created with either complete or partial SAS statements. Okay. Now see, I am creating a macro with a partial statement. It having a partial statement of proc means. Okay. It's simply writing proc means data equal to. Okay. So this calci macro generates a partial SAS statement and a partial step. Now let's see how it works. So it's a flexible way of calling. So when you're calling this, see, you're simply passing the data set name and you're completing it step by writing run. So you call person calci. So %calc in backend it's saved as macros with a program proc means data equal to. So while you call, you complete the statement by this giving input dataset name and its end of your step. Okay, so call, so it's telling call the revised macro calc followed by additional code to complete your proc means statements and step. And thus it gets executed without any error. Okay, so you can try this demo D04B. Open this D04B. Okay, all right. So this is how it's working. So look at here. So when you're calling a macro with a semicolon, so why it was telling that we never have to call a macro with a semicolon because it's not a statement. Now understand, when you are calling this example, now this is a partial SAS program, correct? Now understand how it works when you call a macro with a semicolon, which is actually not recommended and it causes a problem. So how it works? Ideally, we know it is going to follow your program flow like this. So %calc semicolon. Now understand, it's copied to input stack when you are asking, when you submitted it. So it goes to word scanner. Word scanner finds it's a macro trigger, hence it goes to processor. So macro processor, it finds it's a macro call. So it looks into your catalog files. So it finds it's a macro with the macro this. So what does it consist? It consists an underlined program of partial proc means statement. So it is copied, it's like this. So this underlined program is copied to input stack. Why? Because it has to follow the process of your program flow from input stack word scanner to compiler. Then only you will get the output, correct? Hence, proc means data equal to this partial statement is copied to input stack. Now, when it is copied to input stack, see, it's already earlier, it is having called with semicolon, correct? So this statement, when it's copied to input stack, it will complete with semicolon, correct? So this is how it appears. So macro text is placed on input stack on top of your semicolon. So now this will go through processor, that is your macro scanning of your, sorry, word scanning. So during word scanning, it tokenize, it goes to compiler, but immediately compiler is always receiving the tokens until it receives the end of the statement. So it finds immediately there is a semicolon, it's end of the statement. Because it's the end of the statement, you know, there is no name of a data set provided. You know what it will do? It will throw an error immediately during compilation. Why? Because proc means data equal to ends with semicolon, it's expecting a data set name here. Hence, it will immediately throw an syntax error message. So it's telling a second error message is generated by the subsequent text. So first it's telling it's passed to compiler followed by semicolon generates a syntax error and it gives that it's expecting a data set. Hence, this is how whenever you call a macro, it is recommended do not call it with a semicolon. This is what unexpected errors it gives. Understood now? Yes.
Yes, Ash.
Yes.
So this is what it's telling,
Yes.
expecting a name. Why? Because here you require dataset name and it default, because there is no dataset name provided here, it's default taking work.name. In this dataset does not exist. Immediately after proc means you have this statement. It is not understanding because it's treating this as independent statement, that it's not beginning with any keyword. Hence, it's a syntax error. See, it's telling again this is a statement not valid and it is not used in a proper order. So this is how unexpected error comes if you call your macro with a semicolon. So it's better never call your macro with a semicolon. All right. Now revise your calc macro again to enable easy and flexible selection of your dataset name and variable name. So you complete this statement, but you do not write any input source of your dataset. Now, why they are giving you this scenario? Because you want to make your program more flexible. You want it automated because the same program, that is proc means, can be used on various data set. It's not restricted to only one table, correct? Are you getting at what it's trying to tell you here?
Yeah.
So next time when you call calci, you should call it with any dataset name and it should create this procmins for that dataset. Simple. All right. So the variable which is going to be analysis variable, that should also be flexible. So that's what it's telling. We'll revise this calc macro again to enable easy and flexible selection of your dataset name and the variables which you are using into analysis. So this is what you simply create this code without passing any dataset and a analysis variable name. So in case if you want to pass on without any dataset name, let's create macro variables within it. Ampersand DSN, ampersand vars. Okay, so use macro variable references within your macro definitions for more increased flexibility. So while calling, you call with three statements. Percent let DSN be your dataset name. Percent let vars be your analysis variable name. Precede it before calling your macro, and when you call your macro along with these statements, what it will do, it will first execute percent let statement. It will go to word scanner. Because it's a macro trigger, it goes to macro processor. Macro processor understands it's a macro variable to be created, hence it creates this in your global symbol table. Now next is percent calc. So it will go to word scanner. It finds it's a macro program. It's a trigger. It goes to macro processor. Macro processor looks into your catalog. It contains underlined code, which is proc means data equal to ampersand DSN var ampersand vars. So it resolves this ampersand DSN values. So let's see how it works. So percent calc consists procmins. So this program is copied in input stack. From input stack, it will go to word scanner. So during scanning, it finds it a macro trigger with procmins. Hence, ampersand DSN goes to macro processor. So this will look into your global symbol table. What is DSN? It's actually your Orion star order fact. So it resolves its value in input stack, goes into word scanner till compiler. So your statement gets compiled for procmins. Same with vars, var. So it consists macro trigger ampersand vars. It looks into global symbol table, resolves it into your input stack. From there, it goes to scanning of word and then compilation. And this is where it ends your statement. So run comes. So when a step boundary is encountered, SAS executes the compile step as macro activity remains paused. Macro activity means this percent calc. Correct? So macro activity stops when percent amend statement is encountered. Why? Because what is percent calc? It's actually a macro program. And what is your macro program? It's actually the whole thing compiled within this macro. That is this. Correct? Are you getting it? So this
Yes.
is how it processes. So symbolic substitution is performed. The word scanner tokenizes the result value and passes to the compiler. Word scanning continues. Macro variable reference is passed to your macro processor. Resolves again, substitutes it, goes to word scanner to compiler. Okay. Then when a step boundary that is run encounters, SAS executes the compile step. SAS macro activity remains paused. So macro activity stops when percent amend statement is encountered, and hence you get this output. Fine.
Yes.
I,
Okay.
yeah, actually, I just want to ask one thing. So
Yes.
when we give this thing, this macro calc with ampersand DSN, these ampersand DSN, they when do you specify them? Like before you can specify them, like
It should be before calling your macro, because
okay.
your macro variable has to be created, right? If you write percent let before calling.
Okay. So
So
if we are writing ampersand DSN as suppose Orion class dot test.
you can use any data set. That's what you're making it more flexible.
So we have to change that ampersand DSN every time before running this program, right?
We are not changing, we'll be just giving its value. So for here, this is there in the program, it is there in the memory. So you're not going
Mhm.
to change this anytime. Next time, if I
Yes.
want to create this report on your new data set, suppose I'm working on a new data sets from sashelp.cars, okay? So what I do is,
Just change it here. Yeah.
that's it. Before calling, just change here. So even if it's this, sashelp.cars, and my variable I want for analysis for my because it's a means, it should be variable numeric. So
Numeric.
MSRP. Okay.
Okay.
So because it's new time, I did not created this macro earlier. So I just first compile my macro. So my macro is compiled because see earlier in the first option in my first program only I had opened up the option for m compile not equal to all. It's giving me this that it has compiled without error. And before calling this cal, I'm just calling with this percent let statement. So it will first create the macro variables and then it will give me this calc executing. So see how it's working with percent let, it will create my macro variable in my global symbol table. When I call this, because of emprint is all, it's telling this is the underlying program. So this underlying program, see, it's representing what ampersand TSN is resolving to.
Okay. Got
Hence,
it.
I got this. But in
Yeah.
case while resolving this macros also within your program, you want to see what ampersand DSN is resolving, you can also open up a option called as options symbol gen.
Okay.
So this symbol gen will always resolve it, or it will give you the information in log about your macro getting resolving. So it will just tell you that what macro values it's resolving to in the log. So because of symbol gen, your DSN is resolving to sashelp.cars, which got resolved here in your procmin statement. And because of symbol gen with vars, you have ampersand vars. So it's telling what vars is resolving to. So it's telling here and it's telling your macro got executed. With this procmins, you got this result.
Okay. Perfect. Got it. Thank you.
Got it? Yeah. So it's always recommended do not end with semicolon. Why? Because in your earlier demo in 4B, that was the problem. It called it without with a semicolon. It was giving you error. Correct? So
Yes.
yeah. So do not call your macro with a semicolon, because your program underneath may have sometimes partial statements. So instead of every time doing this, so you're making it more flexible that you're creating macro variables within your program, and while calling your macro, you simply create those macro variable values. All right, understood?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So if this is clear, Shanmuga, Swarupa, okay. So now let's understand this program flow. So when you call it with percent calci semicolon, this is how it works. So now here calci with semicolon will not have a problem. Why? Because it has all complete statements within it. Correct? Are you getting it? Now you're calling this calci with semicolon. See, add a semicolon to macro call. So that's why it's telling sometimes it may give you errors or it will work haphazardly when you call a macro, but sometimes it may not. Why? Because the underlying program consists of complete statements. So what is this underlying program? Proc means data equal to semicolon, var is ending with semicolon. So here it will not give any error. See now, it will
But
move.
after run, double semicolon can be there, right?
That is not a problem. Double semicolon is not a problem. So, okay, let's understand. So it's telling proc min step is passed to the compiler. The extra semicolon follows the learn statement. The extra semicolon is harmless but unnecessary in this example. Correct?
Okay.
Semicolon, what is the normal meaning end of a statement? So even
And
if there is a semicolon, it won't have any issues.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. And let's work out with one exercise here. So come to your PDF. Lesson 3, definition. So it's on page 3-28. So let's work with level 1, defining and calling a macro. So it's telling open this already existing program E01 for lesson 3. You have procment print. Okay. So it consists of some macro variables. Convert the program into a macro named customers. Set the appropriate system option to display a note in the SAS log. Submit your %let statement where your macro should be the value with gold. Okay. Change it while calling with type. Activate the appropriate system option to display source code, that is mprint, during compilation. So let's open this program. E01. So let's create a macro. %macro customers. Okay, so now the next topic is, now you are quite familiar that how you are writing a macro program with macro variables. Okay, so here we have created a macro with two variables. So while calling your macro, you call it with writing your call statement with 2%let statement. So ideally you need to use 3 statements while calling. So this is what you are doing it. Again, it's time consuming. So as what is the purpose of macro? That you have to automate your program. So in case if you're automating and when you are calling this macro with every time with %let, so it's not automating. So the next part which we are learning is we can create a macro program telling that while creating a macro itself, we can ask SAS that it consists macro variables. Okay, so while calling or before creating a macro, we define it with parenthesis telling it consists macro variable DSL. and it also consists a macro variable called vars. All right. So I first compile it. First, we'll execute your macro program. So let's check whether it's compiling. So it's telling it's compiled without any errors. Okay. So while calling now, I no need of every time giving this. Okay. So what I do is I simply call this macro with its name. So I give the name, suppose whatever name I want. So I want Orion dot, suppose it's same order underscore fact. Okay, so this is a data set, comma. So how you have created with the names of this macro variables. So these are termed as parameters. So I pass on the values of parameters while calling, and I tell here the calling value is now, suppose, quantity. All right, and while calling, I simply call this by passing on my parameter values, that is the values for my macro variables. So this is making my program more flexible. See, so is this going to be more flexible or this going to be more flexible? So this with macros with parameter list is going to be more flexible, correct? So this is the program where we are creating a macro with parameter lists. So what is a parameter? It's nothing but what are the macro variables within your program. You are listing it while creating your macro, and this is called as parameters. And while calling your macro, you just pass on the values for your parameters. So your first position was dataset name, hence give this while calling, and then it was the analysis variable name, hence you call it giving it a comma in between them. Understood, everyone? So this is a macro with parameter list, and this is a macro with the values of parameter list. I hope this is understanding to each one of you.
Yes.
Yes, Asha.
So this is making your program more flexible. So next time when you call a macro in your new session, just connect your macro with the library and just call it with this parameter list. That's it. All fine?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that is what the next topic is, macro parameters. So objectives will define and call macros with parameters, will describe the difference between positional and keyword parameters. So notice macro variable references within this macro. So we know within this macro, we have two macro variables. So every time you call a macro, you need to submit three statements, two for creating your macro variable values and one for calling it. So this is not making your program more automated. So hence create a macro with parameter. So while calling, why don't we have an easy way, just while calling, just pass on the values. So you can define a macro with a parameter list. So you can simplify your calci macro so that it can be called with one line code instead of 3 lines. Okay. So the parameters could be positional, keyword, or mixed. So why it's telling parameter types? Because when we are creating this a macro, we are passing on that the macro has to be created with having parameter list. So I'm simply providing this parameter as per its positions. That means first position I'm giving DSN, second position I'm giving vars. So as per the positions while naming the parameters, I call as per the position itself. Hence, it's called as positional parameters. Why? Because in case if I miss this position, suppose instead of writing dataset name first, I write this and I call it. So do you think it will work out without any issues? Do you think it will work? So it's giving error. So what is happening when I called it at first position, I'm giving quantity. Second, I'm telling orient dot order fact. So in proc means what is your data set name? ampersand DSN, it's resolving to quantity. So it's telling dataset name is quantity. So it will search quantity into your work library. So it's telling it's an error, no dataset found. Still, it moves ahead and it reads for your var statement, ampersand var's value is oran dot order fact. So for var statement, you never need a column name like this. So again, it's a syntax error. See, are you getting it? Therefore, it's called as a positional parameter. Why positional? Call your parameter values as per the positions which you have provided in your macro definition. So this DSN position it takes as quantity, var's position it takes as oran dot order fact. Understood? Therefore, you have to be very careful while calling your macro with positional parameters that what is the original position according that values you need to provide. I hope you are understanding.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Ashwini.
Yes,
Yes.
Priyanka, Swarupa,
Yes.
great. So that is what this is telling. So there are three ways you are passing the parameter list. So this parameter list is a list of macro variable referenced within the macro program. So there are three types of parameter list: positional, keyword, and mixed. So this is what the positional parameters it's telling. So positional parameter list defines macro parameters in a particular order. So parameter names are supplied when the definition of your macro is defined. So the first position is DSN, second position is var. So this is how you define the parameters. Just give the name of the macro variable separated by comma while creating a macro. So while calling, you call it with the same order. Order 1 is the dataset name, order 2 is your variable analysis. So parameter values are supplied when the macro is called. So parameter values must appear in the same order as they are corresponding parameter names when they were created in your macro definitions. So this is how. So what will happen when a macro is called with a parameter list values? It will not search this macro variables in global symbol table, but it will create a temporary local symbol table only for this macro called as calc, and it will only evaluate this macro variables from this local symbol table. So once this calc execution is over, your SAS memory is freed up from this local symbol table, and hence it's always recommended to create a macro with a parameter list value so that it's temporarily assigning it into local symbol table, and hence the memory space is reutilized. So when a macro with a parameter list is called, a local symbol table is created and populated with your macro parameters. So macro variable is a local table exists only during macro execution and can be referenced only within a macro. So local symbol table are deleted after macro is execution over or end. Understood? What is happening where it looks for resolving for a macro variable, it creates its local symbol table, and within that it creates this macro variable, it resolves it while calling this or executing this. Hence it's always recommended to make use of local symbol table when you're creating your macro. All right,
Yes.
Priyanka, Shanmuga, Swarupa.
Yes.
Yes, Ashwini.
Yes.
Good.
Actually, just one question. Like
Yes.
the variable quantity, right? So for
uh,
every variable, we have to create a different macro.
every variable we are not creating any macro, your macro is same calc. So while calling, depending on your business scenario, you are going to call that particular with the macro variable values. So in our case we had used order fact table instead of that while calling. Now see, I copy the same thing, I'm using the same macro program called calc, but while calling, okay, instead of writing this two datasets name, I may give a different dataset. Suppose I write I'm working with SAS help dot, I have a class table comma, I have age. All right. So what I'm doing, I'm using the same program, but I'm calling with the different macro variables. So what is my dataset name? sashelp.class. And what is my analysis variable? Age. So what I'm getting at,
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. It's
understood? So
called the
in your
prop
log,
means, right? It's
that's it. So in your log, if you check, you have called your calci with the parameter list values. So it's telling when it is reading proc means data equal to, so your ampersand dsn is resolving to sashelp.class. Now see the position of your symbol gen is telling wherever there is a macro variable, it resolving to this value. So its position is not fixed, it may give this value before this value is resolved or after the value is executed within your program, but it's showing the position that dsn in the program is resolving to this. Hence in proc means data is equal to sashelp dot class. Vars, you have age,
yeah. In vars,
correct?
we can have more than one, right? Age, or if there is any other parameter, that also we can use.
But in your program you need to specify those variables. Here you are giving only one variable.
Okay, so we have to specify it there. Okay.
Yes, here you can write vars 1. Here you can
Okay.
include another variable, suppose you want.
Yeah, yeah, I got it now.
Understood now? Because in case if you do not provide that, it won't understand for what are you talking about to SAS. Correct? So
Yeah.
SAS should know what are you telling. So your second variable, if you want, you write age and you write suppose weight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first you have done some modifications in this macro, compile it because it should have that new variable ampersand varc. Yeah, but before that, during compilation, you did not provide it its parameter list telling its two variables, correct? So you need to specify vars1 common and you need to tell that it is going to be vars2. It has two macro variables within it. Fine.
Yeah, I
Once
got
it is defined, then you call it. So once you have defined it, see now you call it with a comma. So it's called as a positional parameter. So position is important, hence you have to be careful while calling. So two macro variables which are analysis, age and weight. So this is what it's telling: mean a weight, mean age, standard deviation, minimum, max, all this. Got it?
Yes, Ashwini, thank you.
Great. Others?
Yes, Ashwin.
Yes, Ashwin, got it.
Great. So this is what is happening. So when a macro with a parameter list is called, a macro symbol table is created and populated with a macro parameter. So it's creating a local symbol table and it will look into those macro variables into that local symbol table for that particular macro. Macro variables in a local table exist only during macro execution and can be referenced only with the macro. So local symbol tables are deleted after execution of macro is done. All right, understood?
Yes, yes.
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 So question here is a percent let statement outside a macro definition creates a macro variable in which of the following?
Since it is outside macro definition, it will be our regular global symbol table.
A,
Okay, others agreed?
yeah, global simulative.
Yeah. Yes.
True. Okay, it's correct. So this is the position parameter. So you have to be very careful while calling with its position. So see here, you are not calling it with any value. So define and call a macro with positional parameters. So you are defining it with a parameter as opt, start, stop. So within your program, you're writing a frequency procedure. You have start, stop, opt. Okay. So first, when you're calling with opt value, then a start and a stop value. But when you are calling this, there is no opt value. Now go ahead and open this activity D06A and execute this. Execute one with this and execute second with this and check in log what is happening with your second call.
Done, Ashwini.
Okay, but did you understand what is happening when you call this second macro? Check your log. Is it working perfectly?
Yeah, it is not showing the cumulative results.
Yes. So what must have happened at the back end? Yes. What must be happening in the back end? So I've already explained you. Just
While calling, we didn't
Yeah, you
specify
didn't call the
the
no queue.
options. We just gave blank.
so what is happening, because it's blank, it's not understanding what ops is. Okay, here, fine. So for you, it will work, or is it working, or is it not working?
It's working, but no,
It's working
no options.
because ops is what? It's simply selecting what statistics we want, correct? So therefore, by default, it gives you all the statistics, correct? That is cumulative frequencies, cumulative percentage, right? So this was your second option. So it's here, earlier it was suppressing no cumulative, so it's not showing, but here we are not suppressing anything, so it's showing everything of your statistics, correct? Here, right? Okay, so what I'm doing now, just understand, I am writing no cumulative, fine. I do not pass on this value. Now I call it again. Okay, so let's check log. So what it's telling, your start value is resolving to blank. Start value is resolving to blank. Stop, it's resolving to 31st December. Okay. Opt also, it's taking no Q. So when you see the log, or when you see the output, you're just telling orders from this. So it's default reading all the data with whatever the value, and it's stopping wherever you have the end date is 31st December 2008. And you get this frequency report. Are you getting it how it's working?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how it's there. Okay, but now what I do is, so I just try to give this. All right, and I call this. So do you think it will work?
Positions are changed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So because the positions are changed, it will give us error. Because your ops, it will try to resolve the ops part as a data set 8. So it's not understanding,
Even if
correct?
you don't give the comma, it also won't work, right?
Yes, without comma also it will give you error, because comma is a part, while defining itself, you are defining it's separated by commas. So it will treat it as whole macro without a comma, correct?
Yeah.
So this was all about positional parameters. That's the same demonstration. So I won't take this keyword parameter now because it will be, actually it's very simple. Okay, let's move. So now what is positional and key? Now with positional, the positions while calling should be fixed, correct? So now let's make your macro more flexible. So while creating it, I provide it telling with its values, okay, original values. So I may give this original value with a keyword which is with equal to sign, okay. Now I'm making my macro more flexible. So when I'm making my macro more flexible, okay, I give it with keyword parameters. So with keyword parameters, the position is not going to be 1 second. So I'm just selecting this part, putting it here. Fine. So when it is a keyword parameters, the position is not going to be affect my program. Why? Because I'm providing my parameter list along with its initial value. So it's getting compiled without any error. So while calling, okay, I call it with null parenthesis. So with null parenthesis, let's see how it's working. So it's executing. So see 1st Jan till 31st December 2008. It's taking my last date, first date. So with null parenthesis, it's going to execute with its original values while creating my macro with its original values, with this parameter list values. So with null parameters, it will take its original values when I have defined a macro with its parameter list values. Okay. So this is what it makes my program more flexible. So it's telling it's resolving to 1st Jan 2008. Stop value is resolving to this date. OPT is resolving to no CUM, and hence my proc fric is executing and I'm getting the result. All right. So this is positional parameters. So in positional parameters, so what I do is I may not give initial values, okay, but I simply write that I want my stop date is equal to, suppose I write stop equal to, I write 31st August 2008. Fine. Now understand. When I call this, see, it's resolving 1st Jan to 31st August. So when I check my log, so what it's telling, when I called my parameter list only with one value, it's still executing. So it's resolving my start value 1st Jan. Ops value is resolving to no CUM. In title also it's resolving the values and it's giving me the result. So this is where I'm making my macro parameter more flexible. So when I'm with my keyword parameter, my earlier parameter list is already defined, so it will work with this. Hence, while calling the position is not required, and you simply call it with the desired value with only specific macro. Getting it, everyone?
Yes. Instead
Yeah.
of that, we can just give null parenthesis also.
That's what. So null parenthesis is default values when you were defined. But if you want to change that, your now requirement of your program is let everything be same, but your stop value should be with a different date. So simply call it with a different stop value. So your start value will be the same. Your opt value remains the same. Fine.
Yes, yes.
So
Are you
any
getting it
value
now?
we can change, right? Start, stop, opt, anything we can change.
Anyone, any which one. So now here again I write comma and I write opt should be equal to I want to see no percentage. All right. I just call this. So see, position is also not mattering because it's a keyword. You are telling parameter equal to and its value when you are calling it. So it's making more flexible. Fine. Is it opt or opts? Opts. See, while defining it was opt. So while calling I wrote opt. So I'm just passing on this values with keyword with your macro with its value.
It's
Keyword.
OPT, yes, it is.
That's what I was thinking. OPT and I'm writing it opts. I'm so sorry. Done. So you get only frequencies, no percentage. Correct?
Yes.
So here also, if you write only frequency you want, so write no cumulative. So you want to suppress with no percentages and cumulative.
In this case, you can give opt is equal to just blank.
In that case, it will not work or it will give you with all your statistics of frequencies. See? frequency percentage, cumulative frequency, cumulative percentage.
Mhm.
Understood?
Okay. Yeah.
Everyone,
Yes.
Yes.
Shanmuga,
Yes,
Priyanka.
Ashwini.
Yes, Ashwini.
Okay. So for additional convenience, assign default values to macro parameters. So instead of positional, make use of keyword parameters. So what is keyword parameters? So while defining your macro itself with your parameter list, you give your parameter equal to some initial values. So this is what the syntax is. Of course, it should be separated by comma. All right. So while calling, so either you call it with null parenthesis or you call it with only one value which you want to change, or with only look at the positions. You can mix match the positions. So call a parameter with keyword parameters. So keyword parameters can appear in any order and can be omitted from the call without space holder. So if omitted from the call, the keyword parameter receives its default value, which was originally defined with your parameters list. All right.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's it, this demo. So open this demo D06B. Please open this activity A01 for lesson 3 and check out. Submit this program, edit the macro call to omit the parenthesis. Submit the macro call again. What do you see in the log?
The same result with in both the cases.
Okay, so with the parameter and without parameters.
Yes.
Okay, does others also get the same thing?
Yes.
Good.
Yep.
Priyanka, Swarupa, sorry, Shanmuga.
Yes, yes, Ashwini.
So in SAS windowing environment, your macro does not execute without parameters because it was defined with parameters, but with your overall other tools like EG and Studio, it will execute even without parameters. So they were just trying to tell you that with windowing environment, it may work without, it may not work because it will act as an error. But in your EG and Studio, it's working without any errors. So this is something which is they have upgraded with the tool. Okay. Now the parameter list can contain a mix of position and keyword parameters also. So you can write a macro parameter with a list of your macros, that is with your list values, with your keyword as well as position. All right. So how it is? So this is what it's telling. So this is your position. This is your keyword. All right. So while calling, you can call it with your only position value, or you can call it with your keyword values with giving new values, or you can give this. So there is no start value or with null parentheses. So in a mixed parameter list, positional parameters are listed before keyword parameters in both the macro definitions and macro calls. So if you are trying to create a macro with mixed parameter list, that is with positional as well as keyword, see to it your positional parameter while defining as well as while calling, it's always placed at the beginning. Okay.
In the second call, stop is coming before start?
Because you have not mentioned anything about opt, so it is keyword, so it will work as it is because you have not mentioned position. So by default it will take opts as blank, so it will give you with all the parameter list with, or sorry, all the frequencies here. So
No,
it
no,
is
no.
default. It's because you have not mentioned here, it will have no issues.
Mhm.
It's a keyword parameter.
It's a keyword here. But when you are calling, you're just changing the values of keyword. Your ops will remain as it is. But while calling, see here, you are changing your ops value. So while calling, you're not giving stop first and ops value next. It's just trying to tell you that when you're using a mixed parameter list, see to it that your positional parameters is always given in the first priority or in the beginning. So while calling also, even if you're changing, see to it you are giving it in the first position. So
Yes.
here you are not specifying anything, so it will work with default.
Yeah. Understood. Yes.
Understood?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So come to this demo D06 C 6C. Okay. So I am creating this macro first with my parameter list. Okay. So while
Ashwin,
calling, yeah,
I will log off.
no problem. I've already done. It's last
Yeah.
point and I'll be stopping. Yeah. Thank you. So now understand here, when I'm calling it, okay, so in case I have mentioned it like this, ops, I'm telling I want no percent. Understanding. So it's an error. Why? Because this becomes my stop, all fine. But then what is this? It's not understanding. So it's already telling all positional parameters must precede before your keyword parameters. So I'm passing on the values for my positional parameters in between while calling. Understood?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Shan- all right. So this is all about your mixed parameter lists. Fine. So whenever you call your parameter list, if it's mixed, say to it, your position for your positional parameters is always at the beginning of your parameter list. That's it. And end of your lesson. Any questions here?
Not so far, Ashwin.
No.
Okay.
No, Ashwin.
Okay.
That's
So great. Exercise I leave to you as your self-study. In case any doubts, we can always discuss it. So for today, it's done with this chapter. So please revise this because it's one of the important topic with respect to your um, projects whenever you will be working in future. And of course, with respect to your technical round of interviews for your interview sessions. All right.
Yes.
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 So with
Yes.
this, we'll stop our day. So wish you good night. Thanks for attending. Take care and bye.
Thank you, Ashwin.
good night, Ashwini. Oh, have a good day, Ashwini. Bye.
No problem. Good night. Take care.